There's been a lot of controversy about how AMD is moving forward with the next generation and previous generation chipsets. Today we're going to talk about compatibility, B550, and whether you should buy now or wait. AMD recently announced the new Ryzen 3s, and while it may seem like a great time to build a budget system, you'd be mistaken. The new Ryzen 3s will support existing boards, so your 300, 400, and 500 series boards. Though the 300 series is ultimately up to the manufacturer to release that BIOS for whatever board. But here's the bigger problem. If you remember my Zen 2 compatibility video, or really any video, you'd remember that the 300 series boards weren't guaranteed any support due to the limitation of the actual size available to the BIOS. But, fast forward now, that hasn't really seemed to be much of an issue, as most manufacturers had released beta BIOSes to their 300 series boards for Zen 2 3rd gen support.
Well, if this didn't hit you before, unless you have an X570 board, you're done. 4th gen Ryzen will not support 1st and 2nd generation motherboards. The actual CPU support list in those motherboards BIOSes are full, and while they could just get rid of the older chips on said list, you could probably assume that'll cause issues with legacy support and whatnot. So, if you want to get a 4th gen chip, X570 or B550 is what you'll need. So, if you're about to upgrade your motherboard, don't, as you may want to consider a B550 board, which in case you didn't hear, won't support 1st or 2nd gen chips. This may or may not be the same for X570, but realistically, you wouldn't be too interested in going backwards in terms of upgrading. Now I want to talk about why AMD has screwed basically everyone with a B450 motherboard. The 400 series boards were initially for the 2nd generation, cool. But AMD decided to only release their higher-end X570 chipset with the new Ryzen 3000 series CPUs. No budget to mid-range B550 motherboard anywhere to be seen. Nobody exactly knows why they did this. I've heard that these boards had production slowed because it wasn't AMD themselves producing the chipset, but regardless, X570 is not for everyone due to its higher pricing, so I'm sure there are lots of people wanting to build a budget system with 3rd gen, say a 3600. That CPU alone eats up a lot of a given budget, so realistically, it wouldn't make much sense paying the X570 tax unless you needed those extra features. If AMD had released B550 along its X570 counterpart, it wouldn't be too much of an issue, but here's another thing. B550 looks to be targeting a more high-end market. Some pictures of what some B550 boards are going to look like have been revealed, and while it's cool and all that no more active cooling fan is needed, and PCIe Gen 4 is a thing, it doesn't take a genius to see that unless there are going to be less premium boards, those boards look very expensive compared to B450, which I think is the biggest problem here. If you have the budget for it, by all means take it, but remember, B450 was great because you could spend less than $100 and get a good enough board and use that extra cash elsewhere, or not use any more cash because you're building a budget PC. Again, there are people that are willing to upgrade their motherboard and those that aren't or just can't. AMD said AM4 would be supported until 2020, and honestly, 3 CPU generations, originally announced in 2016 and released earlier the next year, is and was great while it lasted. I mean, LGA 1151 is like 5 years old now, but there's like 3 different versions? Going back to AMD though, I recently built my friend a roughly $650 PC. The board was $70, ideally should have been cheaper like $60, and the 1600 AF was $85, which may or may not be discontinued now, and RAM was around 70, bringing the total core platform to roughly a third of the budget. If B550 only has expensive $150 plus boards, and you plan on getting a 3100 or 3300X, you're paying nearly $300 alone just for a CPU and board, which again, if you're targeting a higher build cost, that wouldn't be an issue, but unless there are lower end B550 boards, and only if, while it will work on older motherboards, the 3rd gen Ryzen 3's mere existence is being challenged here, because if you're already investing in 3rd gen, but are forced to either not be able to upgrade because your board doesn't support 4th gen, or you can't buy either an X570 or B550 board, why even bother? If you have an X470 board, that probably sucks, even more at this point. The problem isn't that AMD ended support for older boards, but because the unfortunate reality is, even if you have a really high-end 1st or 2nd gen motherboard that could probably power a 4th gen chip no problem, you can't have everything. AMD motherboards, most of them anyways, don't suck as much as the previous FX boards did, because Ryzen is actually something worth investing in. But honestly, you can say what you want about Intel, but considering a cheap board for that platform isn't hard to come by, usually anyway, why not just go Intel? If you're going to upgrade, you're not going to upgrade on the same generation. One of the new 10th Gen i3s has identical specs to the 7700K, a still very competent gaming chip even in 2020. Pricing could be better, but an i7 is now an i3, which doesn't sound much of an innovation, but i3s used to be dual cores. So, if you're wanting to build a budget PC, I'd wait until B550 pricing becomes more clear, but honestly, unless you're okay paying more for a board, I wouldn't get your hopes up. I know they said support until 2020, the older boards won't support future generations, but the problem is that they didn't release B550 earlier. Honestly, if you're okay with returning your B450 board and plan on sticking with Ryzen, not the worst idea at this point. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or suggestions, please let me know in the comment section and I'll do my best to get back to you. If you did enjoy the video, hit that like button, but if not, you know where to go. While you're there, consider subscribing to the channel and enable notifications for more quality tech videos. Anyways, thanks for watching and I'll see you later.